Keys and Kingdoms is one of the settings we're creating for the Aegis game system. We have no structure currently in place for the actual system, but the setting aims to combine your classic D&D style high fantasy with the vibes of a Disney-esque animated fairy tale musical, though generally with adult theming. Unless you run a campaign that's appropriate for children, you can do that, we're not doing that. This series of videos, using the only medium in which I can properly express myself, Microsoft PowerPoint, will show off the 10 Keys and Kingdoms core rules, people, and the manner in which we're interpreting them in our 5th edition homebrew campaign. Using the original 5e rules from 10 years ago, not the new ones, we don't have time to learn to master subtle differences to the system. It's going to be all about the imagination and telling a story in this world we're building. Today, we're looking at Dwarves. Fairy tale dwarves were featured prominently in the very first Disney animated feature, so I knew right away that this setting would feature dwarves that combined the aesthetics of the modern fantasy dwarf with those of classic fairy tales and mythology. Here's the sample dwarves I commissioned. Definitely not seeking for any characters in the Keys and Kingdoms art style to be quite as cartoonish as the original 7 dwarves, but more so than this particular artist was comfortable getting. We'll find a balance. Dwarves in this setting are not quite as ultra-bulky as those of typical high fantasy. Coloration is generally human. Maybe they're more likely than humans to be red-haired. Maybe sometimes they have gray hair as a natural color instead of a sign of aging. Maybe sometimes they have skin in earthy, stony tones like red, yellow, or gray. Fashion, of course, nearly always features thick and elaborate hair and beards, though despite the common jokes, dwarf women are not much more likely to be bearded than women of other species. Much. I see D&D 5.5 is streamlining the dwarves and halflings so they don't have subspecies anymore. I can see why. I can see how it was a minor thing that wasn't entirely necessary, but I kinda like the idea of genetically distinct populations of sapient beings, and how that'd be navigated if people were actually substantially different from one another, as much as lions are from tigers at the bare minimum. That's already the thought experiment we look at in discussion of fantasy races, and yeah, I think subspecies add another interesting wrinkle to that. Hill dwarves being at least as different from mountain dwarves as Bengal tigers are from Siberian tigers. What does society think of that? Statistically speaking, while dwarves in most Aegis settings shall be medium in size like in D&D, being a little over 4 feet tall and extremely bulky, dwarves in the Keys and Kingdoms setting shall be small in size, closer to 3 feet tall than 4, and of typical small speed. Being small doesn't really make a lick of difference in 5e, pretty sure it just means they shouldn't use heavy weapons, and that's it. But in Aegis, I hope for size to have more impact and present more of a challenge. As it has been before, a +2 constitution bonus. The logic behind removing such things is, well, what if a constitution bonus doesn't suit the archetype you want your dwarf to embody? Well then, you're thinking outside the box, and that's great. Doesn't mean your dwarf somehow doesn't have the traits indicated by their sturdy dwarven physiology. There have always been dwarven rogues and rangers, they just did it in their own way. Come on. Again, I'd give them low light vision. In this 5th edition adaptation, let's say they have dark vision a bit weaker than that we gave elves. Stoutness is what I call the trait that means they can still move at their top speed when wearing heavy armor or lifting a heavy load. So if you're using encumbrance, the regular kind doesn't apply, only the heavy encumbrance kind does. Let's keep the poison resistance, both to the damage type and the condition. And I sought to bring back stone cunning, the dwarves' natural sense of earth and stone. I was thinking advantage on checks to inspect stone and being able to tell old stone from new, or worked stone from natural, just by observing it with a passive check. Happened to spot out of the corner of my eye that 5.5 is interpreting stone cunning as tremor sense. Nah, I like my thing better. It's old school and it's elaborate. And exclusive to Keys and Kingdoms, to make up for whatever disadvantages there will actually be to being small, there will be dwarven magic, power over earth and stone, and also flame. I'm really not an expert on the spell list, so all I could think of here was Produce Flame at level 1, the crummy version, and Stone Shape at level 7, no material component. Wisdom-based, yeah, that's all I got. So lots of great non-cultural dwarf stats, just natural stuff. Let's go into subspecies. Hill dwarves, the most common dwarves you find intermingling among other peoples, have 2 traits. I'll interpret the wisdom bonus that they used to have as the keen sight trait, just better daylight vision than other dwarves. And I like the hill toughness trait that gives +1 extra hit points per level. Nice and sturdy. I think in Aegis they'll really need that tough constitution and extra hit points, small size equating to significantly less hit points, less meat, just what I'm thinking. Mountain Dwarves are those who come from within their vast underground kingdoms. Since the only trait they had in 5e was armor training, can't do that, I came up with the Mountain Toughness trait. This offers resistance to cold damage, and therefore cold weather, and resistance to being enchanted or paralyzed, representing just incredible physical and mental toughness. Grey Dwarves, the dwarves of the deep underworld, who are not necessarily grey in this version. They had altogether too much stuff in 5e. I gave a couple of their resistances to the mountain dwarves and just trimmed off a few other things that seemed superfluous. Here's what I was left with. Actual dark vision, translated here as superior dark vision, doubling it, leaving them with, well, normal dark vision for 5e. So again, no sunlight sensitivity, no resistance to illusion. How the hell does that even make sense? Instead, their many resistances shall become a complete immunity to poison, boosting up the poison resistance other dwarves have. And upon reaching level 5, can make themselves invisible. I don't like the ability to enlarge oneself as being an innate trait. I think it's great as a favorite tactic of dwarves and Goliaths and such, to get big for the extra strength and resilience. I think it's a spell that a lot of them end up learning, but I don't like it as an innate trait. I think it's more of a cultural thing for those who reach that level. My dwarves have an average lifespan of under 200 years, but can make the 300s if they're lucky. Creature type, of course, is humanoid. Languages are common and dwarven. Dwarf culture tends to be lawful good in its approach, having a strong sense of fairness and justice. Grey Dwarf society, however, is lawful evil, seeking to build grandiose empires and crush the weak. Thanks for joining me. Stay tuned for more vids on the peoples of Keys and Kingdoms.